there's no doubt this is an economic blow. South Africa's economy contracting more than expected. We saw that 0.2% decline. And if you look at it on an annualised basis, between July and September, the economy declined by 0.7% compared to the same period last year. Of particular concern, agriculture, they were talking about it there, falling by around 10%, nearly 10%. Let's speak to Isaac Mhlanga, Chief Economist at RMB now. Thank you for being with us. As always, Isaac, what's your reaction to this number? Is it worse than you expected?
It's worse than what we expected. We have been expecting a slight positive, a 0.1 in the positive, and we ended up with a negative 0.2. But if you look at the range of forecasts, they are quite wide, ranging from a negative 0.3 to a positive 0.2. So it shows how uncertain it is to forecast the South African economy in the current environment. But if you look from a production side, there are, specific themes that we have always observed. It's those sectors that are energy intensive, but we are also now seeing sectors that are related to transport and logistics on the production side. If you look on the consumption side, it is the consumer that have taken a big knock, and gross fixed capital formation that is also not holding up. So it's quite obvious that load shedding continues to have a significant impact. Transnet's logistics failure and dysfunction also having an impact, even though global growth continues to hold up. And then if you look at the consumer, it is under a squeeze because of a significant increase in interest rates that we have seen, still high inflation that is eroding consumer purchasing power. All of those are combining to drag economic growth lower than what we have seen in the previous 2 quarters.
What you're describing is a double whammy. So at home, consumers are feeling the pressure, that cost of living crisis, and then companies try and export their goods and they face those huge backlogs at the ports, or trying to get their goods out of South Africa is difficult.
Indeed, and it's happening at a time where we are moving into the festive season, which means all the potential imports that you are seeing that are supposed to be taking place are not taking place. So that contraction in imports is a reflection of a consumer squeeze, but also a reflection of the inability to ship these goods quickly enough into the country, which is why there is an urgent need to resolve our logistic issues. Current estimates put the cost of our logistics at close to 7% of GDP. That is quite significant for 2022 alone, which means this year we're likely to see much more significant impact to our economic growth because of logistical dysfunctions, given that that's when we have seen a lot of the ships still anchoring before they can unload for a very long period of time.
Are you surprised about agriculture? I asked our earlier guests the same thing, because there weren't huge concerns about this part of the economy.
Very surprised on agriculture. Would have expected agriculture to continue to add positively to economic growth. Even the El Nino that we are speaking about has not yet hit as much. But even if it were to be happening now, it's coming following a good season, which means soil moisture is still well. So we are quite surprised why agriculture has contracted, which is actually a concern going forward. But another aspect that we also need to look at, if we look at a very specific sectors, construction is already in a technical recession because there's contracted for 2 consecutive months and 2 consecutive quarters. And then household consumption expenditure also is in a technical recession. It has contracted for 2 consecutive quarters. So we are seeing, we can talk of a rolling recession in different sectors of the economy, given that it's taking place at different times. But fortunately, the services side is holding on. Electricity has added slightly. Transport grown positively. Personal services and financial services continue to provide an uplift to overall economic growth. But it's only a matter of time until these get dragged by the overall economy that is not functioning properly on the production side.
Well, Isaiah, can we end with this? I'm looking at the rand, and it's pretty flat at the moment. It was just a little bit stronger, in fact, and now flat. Does that mean that this isn't being interpreted as a clear signal that we're heading into a recession?
Not necessarily. If you look at the performance of rand and potentially bond markets, they get dominated by global factors. So to the extent that the global factors continue to be supportive, we have seen good performance of equity markets in last month on the back of potential US Fed fund cut rates in early January or first half of next year, which implies that the dollar is slightly weaker. It declined by about 3%, and that would support all emerging market currencies, including the rand. So what happens locally, it shouldn't have much of a big impact. In any case, if we just look at last month's performance as an example, we saw a medium term that wasn't really that much positive, but we also saw significant load shedding. We had also Transnet, issues with logistics. All of those factors should have counted against performance of South African financial markets, but we saw positive performance across bonds and equities, which means global factors matter a lot more than domestic factors. And a negative 0.2 contraction in growth relative to an expectation of a negative 0.1, I think we shouldn't make too much out of point decimals differences in actuals relative to expectations. In the bigger schemes of things, the economy is just stagnant.
All right, thank you so much for that. Isaac Mhlanga, Chief Economist at RMB. We'll continue to see if there's a reaction, but as he says, mostly global factors keeping the rand steady for now. And of course, we often see a disconnect anyway between what is happening in the real economy and the markets.